It's back! And I gotta turn that down. Greetings everybody, I am Solidus-Skully, the dude with the two, the man with the plan. Happy Australia Day everybody. Or at least as far as you're concerned, because that's the day I'm posting this. Crash Bandicoot 2 if you couldn't tell, because I was going to do this last year, but a lot of things got in the way, like work and sickness. But that's okay, because now I am healthy-ish, and I'm unemployed, so yay! I can work on videos while being morbidly depressed, and only death can remove the stain upon my honor. But then again, this is not the time to get heavy and depressed on real-life issues. This is time for Crash Bandicoot! And, yeah, I'm talking over the cutscenes because, really, who gives a fuck about the story in Crash Bandicoot 2? And it wasn't actually until I saw a review by TTX, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a video game reviewer for Nostalgic Reviews who I found recently and is quite entertaining, so, yeah, free plugging for what limited viewership that I have. Yeah, this story isn't very good, so, well, I mean, honestly, I think even playing it for the first time, I didn't really think the story was really all that much to be concerned about, but I suppose, yeah, story's just sort of passable, really. Anyway, I mean, this is a game that I do have a lot to say about, and you will hear what I have to say over the mini cutscene. Well, I suppose I should probably get into how I'm running this commentary. For those of you who don't know how I do things on the Australia Day specials for Crash Bandicoot, this is basically a just wing it sort of thing. Not really having any not really having any sort of pre-prepared tangents. I'm not really even doing anything specific about the game. I'm just sort of winging it because it's the one time of the year where I can really just sort of say, yeah, fuck it, and say whatever the hell I really need to. So, now we get into Crash Bandicoot. I'm probably gonna stop that now. Anyway, this is a game that I have quite a lot of memories for, because this was the first Crash Bandicoot game I ever played. I didn't play it in 1997, because I didn't and still don't have a PS1. And, well, basically, this came at a time when I was just getting into my nostalgic games sort of phase. Well, I mean, I say nostalgic in quotation marks, but I guess what I should say is retro late 90s to early 2000s sort of 3D games. Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, I guess a general plot layout. For those of you wondering what the hell's going on, Cortex found a super cool crystal, then spent a year building a space station, and while Crash was just sort of fucking around, Cortex was able to amass power, but now he needs Crash to collect 25 crystals, and Crash, for whatever fucking reason, decides to go along with it because, honestly, I don't really know. I mean, I guess you could just sort of chalk it up to Crash being a bit stupid, but at the same time, though, it does kind of bring into question, because, I mean, I never really bought the idea that Crash was stupid, that he was just more so kind of insane. I don't know, Crash's characterization is kind of all over the place in terms of the series. Like, I mean, you have the classic games where I guess you could really define him as a little bit goofy and a little bit... he doesn't really think things through, but at the same time he has a fair range of expressions, and then I think there's... or at least the sort of characterization I think they try to go through with Twinsanity onwards, where they try to portray him as more idiotic rather than insane. And then with the Mind Over Mutant games and Crash the Titans or whatever, that I think tried to turn him into more of a babbling... I don't know if I can really say this, but again, for the lack of a better term, more of a babbling retard. I don't know. It's a bit all over the shop, and I completely forgot my previous tangent, but that's just how we do it around here. We have to wing things! Anyway. I suppose I should probably start off with my experience with Crash Bandicoot 2, because I did mention beforehand. Now I remember, because this was back around 2009, I think, where I mean, at the time, insofar as my video gaming was concerned, I was pretty much keeping up with the latest releases of pretty much any game that was coming out at the time. But at the same time, there was also a little something in me that felt like I was missing a lot of the games from my early childhood, which was typically a lot of... well, I mean, it's a little bit weird to say, because the games of my childhood weren't really platformer-related, it was more so third-person shooters and FPS games, so... I guess what I was really looking for was that sort of... because, I mean, Crash Bandicoot was a franchise that I always knew was around during my younger years, but it was a sort of franchise where I didn't really play it because I was more so... well, I mean, for one thing, money, obviously, and it was also the fact that a lot of the games that I was enjoying a lot of the time and had easy access to was with a lot of third-person shooters, so in that respect, Crash Bandicoot and me didn't really come to... even when I did start getting into some of the platformers like Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter, and Sly Raccoon even, my attention was pretty much more hooked into those games than it was Crash, so... I mean, I guess by the time, you know, Crash Bandicoot fell by the wayside was honestly at the point where I was typically thinking, yeah, I figured I might as well give the series a shot by this point, which, by 2009, a lot of people, I guess it kind of completely lost interest, or at the very least, the main fanbase for what the two Mutant games really did for the series. Other than that, though, I don't think it's... Other than that, though, this is what led me to Crash Bandicoot 2, and why I picked this game up compared to the first game, which was on the PlayStation Network of the PS3, is because I honestly like the cover of Crash 2 more than I did Crash 1. And it is very lucky that I picked up this game as opposed to Crash 1, because, I mean, if I picked up Crash 1 before any of the other games, I don't think I would have given the series a shot, because that's... actually runs into a very similar story with Rayman, actually, because, I mean, I initially picked up Rayman thinking it was going to be a 3D platformer, because, I mean, most of the footage I've seen of the Rayman games was of Rayman 2 and 3. I picked up Rayman 1, and it was a 2D platformer, which was okay, even though I didn't really play very much of it, but I didn't quite enjoy it as much as I thought I would have. So, at this stage, I still haven't really picked up any other Rayman games, which, I mean, I really should, but... you know, it really does go to show how picking up a certain game in a series might not necessarily be for you. And, yeah, in that sense, I picked up Crash 2 purely because I like the cover, and to me it felt very homely. I don't really know what it is to feel, because, I mean, I wouldn't say nostalgic, but I guess, as I coined the phrase in the Gex 3D Enter the Gecko review, I called it the Gecko effect, where it gives off a certain atmosphere and air of the time that it can somehow transfer over to the present day, and picking up Crash Bandicoot 2 and playing it for the first time, again, it brought back that warm feeling, and again, ever since I played Crash Bandicoot 2, it's been probably my... yeah, I'd say that it is my favourite of the Naughty Dog trilogy, ever since I first picked it up. I mean, that is not to say that I don't enjoy Crash 1 or Crash Bandicoot Warped! But, you know, Crash Bandicoot 2 is a game that I hold very dear to me, and it's also a game that I feel kind of works on the nature of, you know, a concise set of levels compared to Crash 3's more, let's throw in pretty much everything since it's the last game we're going to be doing. I don't know. It's a similar feeling that I had towards the Batman Arkham games, actually, between Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. And, I will say that Crash Bandicoot 2 is also the game that I have the most experience with, as you can tell right there, since I remember spending more than a good amount of hours back in 2009 trying to get the gem. Excuse me, but to no avail, because, well, I didn't know how to do it until I ended up learning the trick off a couple of YouTubers, actually, which I was watching walkthroughs of, to get some of the gems, which I guess does go into one of my critiques about the game, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Needless to say, Crash Bandicoot 2 is the game that I think well, it's either Crash 2 or Crash to Insanity that I have the most experience with. But, yeah, this is a game that I think if you know what you're doing, you can actually clear comfortably from, like, an afternoon to, a decent time of night, actually. But, I mean, then again, that's if you want to sit down and give it a full-on, playthrough. Anyway, going on to other tangents, and I suppose how I'm going to be running this. Outside of the 2 cutscenes and, one at the end, you're pretty much going to be seeing a very abridged run of Crash Bandicoot 2. It's going to be... well, again, how I handled the Crash 1 commentary, so to speak, was mostly that I did a very level-by-level consensus. Because, I mean, I think Crash games are light... well, say for certain games are light enough on stories that you can pretty much go through any level and you don't really need to worry about the context of it too much. So, in that respect, I'm pretty much going to be showing off every level once, and we'll be moving on to the next one, showing off the boss fights, and then you get the ending cutscene, and then I'll talk over that, I suppose. Again, you're not going to be really getting anything else of note, because, again, if you want a full-on gem completion run-through, I'd suggest going off and looking at a walkthrough by... ah, fuck, what was his name? I think it was Garland the Great? Yeah, he was a YouTuber who's quite possibly one of the best Crash players I've ever seen in my life. This dude is, like, radical, man. So, yeah, give him a watch, he's excellent. But in any case, you're going to be seeing all the levels, including the 2 secret levels that you can see in Cortex's castle, which is a secret area. Known to very few, but known to all, because you need it for 100% completion. The nostalgia is riding off me like a wave. But anyway, as you can see here, compared to Crash 1, everything has been pretty much tightened up and focused. Especially with the upstream levels, which this is meant to be a sequel of. It's a lot well, I don't know what it is about these levels. I mean, I guess it might account for the better design, or the fact that there seems to be a lot more platforms than there were with the more logs and moss sort of thing with the original game. But yeah, level designs are tightened to the point where they're a decent challenge, I'd say, although a little bit easier than Crash 1. And overall, I think Crash's responsiveness is just on point. Again, Crash Bandicoot 2 is the sequel, which really did go above and beyond refining everything with Crash 1, and again, I think comparatively to Crash Bandicoot Warped, it's the one that does feel the most concise as well, we'll point out later on. I mean, even though I'm not really going for the gems or anything, it's the sort of game that I think is something that learned from its mistakes and strengthened what was already there. And again, that also goes for getting the boxes, and while one criticism I do agree with is that, you know, you could have had a counter for the boxes, because, I mean, you do in this game, and, well, it is a slight improvement over Crash 1, where if you died and you respawn back at a checkpoint boxes, they didn't save your boxes, whereas in this game, if you hit a checkpoint and you smashed all those boxes up to that point, you get to keep them if you die. But unlike Crash 3, which had one improvement over Crash 2 that I really do miss, yeah, they don't tell you how many boxes in the level there are until you complete it, so if you're missing a few boxes, that is a massive pain to the balls, so yeah, it is something that you gotta watch out for. But even in that sense, though, I mean, it is annoying, but again, if you've played the game for as many times as a lot of people have, it shouldn't be too much trouble. Then again, there are also a lot of things that Crash 2 introduced, actually, like the introduction of death routes, which optional paths, which are a little bit more difficult, but, you know, if you're good at your platforming skills, then you should pass it no fuss, no muss. But yeah, I'm also not going to be warping back to the warp room either. This is pretty much just showing the levels as they are in as much concise detail as I possibly can. Because, I mean, if I did show you us going back to the warp room, it'd be kind of pointless, because then you just get pointless cutscenes with Dr. Cortex going, "Yes, Crash, get me the crystals," even though I'm not manipulating you, because, yeah, to the surprise of no one, Cortex is using them for evil! Even though the intro cutscene kind of already established that with how him and Engine were plotting world domination, I don't really know what the hell they were thinking with Crash 2's plotting, though, because, I mean, the game tries to give the impression that Cortex is on the side of good, even though they show the fact that he has devious intent, you know, otherwise. And I mean, as you saw earlier with the earlier cutscene with Dr. Embryo, which is showing him like going, "Crash, you gotta get the gems, not the crystals!" And, you know, again, the entire plot is that a cataclysm is about to affect the world, and again, if Crash and Cortex don't save the world, then everybody dies. You know, as they so often do. I don't know, Crash 2's story is just... I mean, it is simple, and it doesn't really get in the way, but at the same time, though, it is something that feels a bit weird, or like they probably should have omitted a certain cutscene to try and give the ambiguity. I don't know, there was also a weird thing where they actually tried to turn Brio into something of an anti-hero at this point, which I think was quickly retconned out by the time of Crash Bash. I don't know. It's weird, I mean, I don't know what they were trying to do, because it's like they were trying to keep the same sort of, you know, lack of story that they had with Crash 1, but at the same time try and add a sense of stakes and dynamics that they didn't really want to expand on. I don't know. It's confusing and a little bit contradictory, but ultimately it's just something where you can just sort of shrug your shoulders at, considering the fact that it isn't really pushed in your face all that often, but it's something where, I don't know, it just raises an eyebrow slightly. Again, it's not really anything that I have a problem with, but I don't know, some people might do. On the whole, though, this also places the importance of bonus rooms in a little bit of a different light, because in previous games, you pretty much use them to save your progress or get the password from Torna, who was there for some reason. Except this time you have no girlfriend to save your progress, because Torna, or at least according to Expanded Materials, left Crash for Pinstripe, who, for those of you who don't know, was the gun-toting mafioso from Crash Bandicoot 1, which, well, I mean, realistically speaking, I don't really blame her for doing so, because who would you rather choose if you were a lady of buxom appearance? Somebody who has a gun, has goons, and is a mafia boss in Chicago, or somebody who's a dribbling moron and his geeky tech sister? Yeah, call me a skank if you want, but I'd probably choose the mafia boss. Oh, I'm such a mafia slut, being paraded around. use only as a trophy wife. I know how it is. I know how it is. Snorting the cocaine to cope with the pain. I'm gonna stop that now because that is very fucking dark. I don't want that to taint this beautiful game. Yeah, but yeah. They did... the way they wrote out Torna in this game is in response to... basically a lot of angry complaints that complain that I guess she was a bit too sexualized, which is a little bit, well, I wouldn't really say is surprising considering what we have in this day and age, and so as far as people complaining on the internet is concerned, but by 90s standards, just seems a little bit weird to me, and that's honestly why they did make the comparison for Coco being Crash's sister rather than a love interest, because that would have been very, very... actually I wouldn't really say it would have been awkward if they weren't siblings, but I guess they just wanted to go so far to avoid the complaints that Torna had that they just went above and beyond in the concept. And even then though, I'm not really sure why they were necessarily complaining, because I mean they did bring Torna back for, you know, the Insane trilogy and the Crash Bang Boom party spin-off. I don't know, selective complaints I suppose. I mean I guess they probably could have given her some characterization to kind of offset the sort of buxom body type thing, kind of like they did with... actually, I don't think I want to bring up that example, because that would leave me depressed. But it was an example from the Sonic the Hedgehog series before things went to complete shit and they stopped giving a shit about characterization, continuity, and pretty much giving a shit about the games anymore. But then again, I don't want to keep this negative, because this is Crash Bandicoot. In any case, talking about the level tropes here, there actually is a lot of returning level tropes, as I actually alluded to earlier. Again, you have the Riverside levels, you have the boulder chases, as you can see here. Actually one of the last times I used a boulder in this levels, because I mean, while the chase levels do still continue from, you know, Crash 2, 3, Wrath of Cortex, and to Insanity, this is pretty much the last time we see the boulder. It's been out of work, it's, you know, feeling hard times, had to take a job with the Mafia. And Pinstripe, he's one mean son of a bitch. You know, being a Potteroo and all. What the fuck even is a Potteroo? Actually, I mean, living in Australia, I don't really know what the fuck a Potteroo is. I might... maybe somebody who lives in the more rural areas could probably tell me, but I don't know. Anyway, first boss of the game is Professor Ripperoo, who has taken a crash course in psychology. Yeah, I'm actually really glad this bit of characterization stuck, because if you remember at the end of Crash Bandicoot, they actually had a bunch of epilogues for the characters. And, yeah, it said that after 5 years of intensive therapy, Ripperoo went on to become a doctor and study. And I really do like that they kept it here, because it's funny. Anyway, as you can tell by this boss fight, Ripperoo becomes crazy when he sees TNT. So naturally, he blows himself up, and he tries to attack you with nitros, which if you step on instantly, you'll die. Unlike with the TNT boxes, which you can step over, but when they count down to 0, they explode, and, well, Crash will be dead. So anyway, when he goes insane, just go to a certain spot, and you should be okay. It's actually a very dull boss fight when you know what to do, but, again, assuming that you have patience, this is no problem. I really do like the remix of his theme, actually. Actually, I'd say a lot of the music in Crash Bandicoot 2 is a lot better than Crash 1. I mean, the themes do sound a lot less naturalistic compared to the first game, but it's got a more energetic sense about it, and I don't know what it is about the PS1 conversion of the soundtrack here, but I really do love the way the game sounds. Like, it has... this and Crash 3, actually, because I believe composer Josh Mansell actually released the pre-console versions of the tracks, which are pretty decent in their own right, but I don't know, there's just something about the way the PS1 sounds, which I think gives it a little bit more zest. Yeah, but I don't know, that's just something to consider. Anyway, on to the next warp room, which is ice-themed, as you will soon see when we return later to the Christmas special. Well, kind of exhausted my tangents. Now it is time to think about something else to say. In regards to Crash Bandicoot... Actually, there's somebody else home, so I have to leave for a moment. Excuse me for one brief second. Alright then, back. Sorry about that. Distractions, they happen. In any case, kind of forgot where I was at last time, so instead we'll talk about the ice levels of Crash Bandicoot. Or at least insofar as they relate to Wrath of Cortex. What the hell am I thinking about? Cortex Strikes Back, Jesus Christ. This isn't exactly the worst of it. I do enjoy the aesthetic. I mean, in fact, I'd say, comparatively to the space levels, I'd say the ice levels are one of the more defining characteristics of Crash 2. But, yeah, while some of them can be difficult in terms of getting the gems, it's nothing too difficult. In fact, I'd say the only real pisser is Cold Hard Crash, but even then, that's mostly for the amount of shit that you have to do. Other than that, though, it's very... Jesus. It's very much smooth sailing. In spite of some close calls if you're getting very clipped over Wumpa Fruit. Oh, by the way, even if you attack those little hedgehogs on the front, they will kill you, so be on your guard. I suppose I should probably address the idea. Like, I mean, I guess Crash did still come out in that time period where everything was a one-hit wonder, where if you so much as touch an enemy, he will die and collapse and simply give up on life. Try to avenge his existence in the next life by touching an enemy, which I never really... I can't remember what game it was that had, if enemies attack you, then you take damage. It was a platformer, but I can't quite remember what it was. But it was a platformer where the enemy had to actively attack you before you took damage, rather than, you know, having touch damage exist, which is something I've never really been a fan of, because... Unless, of course, they have spikes at the end of them, like, you know, in the case of those hedgehogs there, then I don't think you should really take damage unless, of course, they actively attack you. I mean, obviously, if there is something, you know, intentionally dangerous, I think it should hurt you, but not something where you just go, oops, I accidentally nudged you. Oh, I can't live anymore. I don't know. Yeah, it's just a bit of a frustrating point of contention for me. Whee! And now we come to the end point of the commentary. Well, no, not the end point of the commentary. You still got an hour worth of content to go, but again, this feel is very much wing it, loosey-goosey sort of stuff, so if I find myself momentarily pausing, I apologize in advance, but fuck it, man, I'm a little bit sauce. I guess part of the reason I'm also bringing this back, since, I mean, I think I already brought up earlier how I didn't end up doing this in 2017 due to, you know, business and life and everything, but, yeah, for those of you who aren't interested in, you know, the horror Resident Evil 2 sort of stuff that's going on for the commentary, then hopefully this can tie you down as the platformer game for the time being. I don't know, that and I also kind of feel in a bit of a Crash Bandicoot mood. Be sure to slow down here, because Crash does pack momentum, and if you're moving too fast, he will be getting a nice TNT hat, which is very lovely, if you don't mind burning to death. But in any case, I don't know what it is. Like, I mean, I wouldn't really... I guess to give some credence into where I am with Crash Bandicoot these days is that while I'm nowhere near as big of a fan as I was back in 2009, it is a franchise that I can still enjoy. It's just on much more of a casual basis, really. So, which is part of the reason why I haven't really picked up the Insane trilogy, because, well, I own all three of the games there, and while it is, I guess, a way... Well, the Insane trilogy is probably a topic I could talk about, even though I haven't played it. Yeah, it is something that I'm at least glad exists. Excuse me, if only for the fact that it reintroduces Crash to a new generation. Although, arguably speaking, the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, or at least the Naughty Dog games, are the kinds of games which I don't think really needed a remaster. Because, I mean, you could argue graphics all you want, really, because I think these games... Well, I mean... I think these games, both in terms of their visuals and gameplay, look and play just as good now as they did back in, you know, 1997, so... Yeah, I think it's arguable to say whether or not they really needed a remake, at least in the same level of games like, say, the original Resident Evil with the Resident Evil 2 remake, or... I suppose even, like... I can't really think of any other examples, but... Salient point being is that, while I don't think Crash necessarily needed a remake insofar as a game that needed to be updated, it is one that I am still at least glad gave the series somewhat of a revival period, although it does make me a little bit curious as to what they're going to do in the future, like whether or not they're going to continue from Crash 3, if they're going to disregard everything after Wrath of Cortex, or if it's going to be pretty much everything from the original series except, I guess, disowning the Crash of the Titans Mind of a Mutant continuity, or if it's just going to be there as sort of a gag reference. I'm not really too sure. I mean, I mean, for as much as fans might disagree, I don't think it would be right to just kind of piss away everything about the previous incarnations of the series, regardless of how people might feel about it, because, I mean, despite what people might think, I don't think the two Titans games were really that bad. I mean, granted, I haven't played them since like the late. I know it wasn't the late 2000s. I think it was like early 2010s. But I don't know. It's just not something I really feel comfortable disavowing. Anyway, we have follow-up to the Hog levels this time. This time with the adorable little polar bear known as Paula, with much better controls and level design that I think is a little bit better accommodated, because I swear to God the hitboxes on the original Hog levels from Crash 1 to be very unreliable. The only real trouble you'll have with this level is mostly trying to get the box gem, which is a little bit tight considering that some boxes are very close together and you have to rely on ice physics to carry you, which is not really reliable at the best of times, but other than that, decent set of levels and ones that I always enjoy going to, especially the second variant of this, which takes place with a nice sunset hue, but we'll get to that level a little bit later. Anyway, I suppose, going back to the topic of the Insane Trilogy, the only one that I think I could really say it has over the original games on the PS1 is that Crash 1 is a little bit better optimized for a playstyle which is better accustomed to most people who play Crash 2 and 3, which, again, is appreciative, but at the same time, Crash 1's difficulty, while it can be very obtuse in places, it's something where if you're going for a very vanilla run without getting the gems or anything, is very much doable. It's just getting the gems, which is very ouchy for the brain. Although even in that sense, though, I mean, the Insane Trilogy does let you play as Coco in regular levels, which, well, I mean, it's sort of a gameplay philosophy that I am a little bit mixed on, to be honest, because, I mean, while it is cool that you get to play as, like, a second character skin, at the same time, though, you can't help but get the impression that it feels very much like, well, a character skin. Because, I mean, what's the point in playing as another character with a different appearance if they play the exact same way? I mean, that's not to say that some games don't go the extra mile into giving characters extra playstyles, kind of like in Devil May Cry 3 if you can play as Virgil with his own different style. Even if it is severely limited and a problem in its own right in my opinion, but I'll get to Devil May Cry 3 when I get to it. But at the same time though, can't really go wrong. I mean, there is people with the whole Sonic mentality of if it doesn't play like X, Y, and Z, then I want nothing to do with it. Yeah, I don't know, it's very tumultuous, and it's something that I feel is very much up to people's own subjective feelings and tastes, which really determines whether or not people think it's a good idea. I don't know. Anything can generally work, just so long as you know what you're doing, it's all just a matter of whether or not people prefer it personally. Or at least despite what people on the internet might tell you by saying that this is the only true way to experience something, because they suck and should die by a boulder, and by getting electrocuted. By the way, the death animation for the boulder is actually one of my favorites, if only for the face that Crash makes. Oh, so this is also... I did mention this earlier, or at least alluded to it, but these boulder levels are also host to some of my least favorite secrets in the game, because when you're hunting for one of the gems, there is a pathway that leads you... Actually, I think I might even show it off in the vanilla level run as well, but there's a level secret where you have to essentially dive down into the pit in order to find the secret, which... Again, you wouldn't necessarily know what to do, save for the clue where you can hear the... Oh, that's a little bit of a spoiler, but where you can hear a certain nightmare fuel-inducing creature still making its growls beneath the pit even after it's fallen down, so... It's a very subtle hint, and one that I think a lot of people would snarkily go, well, I mean, you'd have to be a complete moron not to see through that level. Yes, a fine vintage. A little on the rough side, but nothing too good. Sorry, I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but, you know, outside of that snarky sort of, oh, well, I've got it on my first try sort of comments, it's just frustrating. It's a design philosophy that a lot of 90s games had, admittedly, but, I don't know. It's just a bit of a pain in the ass. But anyway, we're now at one of my favourite level trips in the entire game, the sewer setting, because sooner or later we're plant food. I will say that these levels probably aren't really the best to commentate over, but I do like the very grungy look it has to it. I don't know. Not to mention, these are probably some of the more appealing sewer levels I've seen in a video game. Others just tend to be either... They go very overt on the dinginess factor, like in The Walking Dead Season 1, or they just... I don't know, just look generic. Excuse me. And now we go to a secret... And that stuff right there. that I think really gets to me. You wouldn't, I mean, a lot of people would say, oh, well, the Nitro's there, so what are they doing there? Again, that shit that you, I mean, let's be completely honest here. Game design, which pretty much relies on the factor of, oh, I guess that blade of grass is my only way out, is fucking horseshit. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, oh, you could find it easily if you knew about it, but again, you know, these are people that had access to fucking, you know, video game magazines, or, you know, people who, you know, I'm pretty sure back in the day they also had, like, hotlines which you could call up, like, you know, Sony or Naughty Dog or whatever to ask for help in that respect. And I'm sorry, but placing a bunch of Nitro crates there just isn't enough. Or at least on my end. I mean, that's... Again, it's not something that I'm gonna lose sleep over, but, you know, for the first-time player that's trying to go through this in 1997 without, you know, the luxuries of today where we have the internet, where we have walkthroughs and all that sort of stuff, it's just a bit of game design that I think doesn't really lend itself... I don't want to say it doesn't lend itself to modern sensibilities, it just doesn't lend itself to a lot of coherent thought. Because, I mean, seeing Nitros over there, that doesn't say that, oh, I guess something's over there. It says, stay the fuck away from here, it's pretty much pointless. Unless, of course, you pretty much play the game, like, 10,000 times over to the point where you're just that fucking curious. And if you have to be genuinely curious after playing it for days and days on end just to, you know, locate a secret, it's level design that I don't really appreciate that much. Jesus, titty fucking Christ, that... Again, and even in that case, though, I don't think Crash Bandicoot is really the worst with that, because, I mean, Banjo-Kazooie, I think, was far more guilty of that sort of crap than Crash ever was. But in any case, that's enough ranting for one day. Actually, one thing I do want to bring up is that I heard this really cool metal remix of these sewer levels in Crash Bandicoot. I forgot what the guy's name was, though. I think his name was, like, Tolkien, I think? Anyway, he made some really cool remixes of a couple of Crash Bandicoot songs, and they sound really, really crunchy and really, really delicious. I highly recommend that you give them a listen, if I can. I might put a link to it, might put a link in the description later on, but yeah, that is some pretty delicious tunes. Also, we have the obligatory hanging levels, which became a bit of a staple for the Crash series in 2, 3, and Wrath of Cortex. What the hell are these things? They actually kind of remind me of the Scoutflies, actually. Speaking of which, actually, I was taking a look at some of the footage for Crash Team Racing, actually, and I recognized that one of, Oxide's cameras were actually... I swear to God, were either the exact same model or the inspiration for the Scoutfly / camera system that, you know, Samus and Kira used to talk with Jack in the Precursor Legacy. I don't know, there was a fair few things that were actually shared between the Crashes and Jak 1, but then again, that's kind of to be expected with a new game in the series. Anyway, the Komodo brothers, probably one of the more underrated characters in the Crash Bandicoot series. Not really the most memorable, though, but, you know, I think decent enough characters and a decent enough boss in its own right. I suppose that's another thing I could really give Naughty Dog, is that the elevation in boss difficulty, well, I mean, say for a certain one that we'll be getting to towards the end, is actually really well balanced. Like, I mean, from Ripperoo to the Komodo brothers to Tiny and Engine that we'll face later on, I feel like there really is a decent escalation in boss and difficulty settings. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's... I don't know. It's just a decent way of balancing comparatively to Crash 1, which felt very... I don't know. It felt very amateur, I'll say that much. But then again, this was Naughty Dog when they were still getting out of their Way of the Warrior phase, where they pretty much sucked. Well, I mean, I don't want to say that, because, I mean, actually having played Way of the Warrior quite recently, I do enjoy it. Like, not even really unironically, just as a sort of bizarre, sort of whacked-out experiment, really. But I don't know. Oh, I've been thinking about covering Way of the Warrior, because it's a game that you seldom ever hear talked about outside of the brief mentioning of, this is what led to the deal with Naughty Dog and Crash Bandicoot. I don't know. I mean, the two reasons that people really remember Way of the Warrior is either for the White Zombie soundtrack or for bloody... the fact that it led to Crash Bandicoot's existence. And my headset is slipping off. Excuse me for a brief moment. There we go. Should be good. Oh, and by the way, those plants you're seeing being spun away right there is pretty much the same plants that'll appear in Jak and Daxter in Samus's Hut. I gotta say though, like, I mean, I don't want to say that there was really much of a relationship between Crash and Jack insofar as, you know, the series are concerned, because, you know, for obvious reasons, Crash is owned by Activision. Well, at the time he was owned by Universal, whereas Jack was owned by Sony, because Naughty Dog picked him up in 2001. Rather wisely so for the company, but yeah, there is actually an interesting relationship in terms of gameplay, really, because I feel like Jack evolved a lot of the gameplay formulas that Crash Bandicoot had already started. Like, I mean, whereas Crash was very linear, it was very basic, so to speak. I mean, it was one of the earlier 3D games in the series to be created, but at the same time, though, Jack, I think, it opened up the world, had a little bit more plot to its name, and added a lot more things like the spin kick, the... fuck, what was it? Spin kick, punches, the dive attack, the roll move. Again, it felt like a much more fleshed out Crash Bandicoot, and especially as the games went on, as it developed its own style with a more Grand Theft Auto style ornaments. Not ornaments, the Grand Theft Auto style gameplay setup. It really did come into its own while also retaining that sense of platformeriness, for the lack of a better phrase. I don't know. To me, I always kind of felt like that Jak and Daxter was the natural evolution of Crash, which is really what I'm trying to get at here. That being said, though, I can't really see the Naughty Dog of today creating a Crash Bandicoot game, which, I mean, if you've seen the concept art for Jak 4 before they went on to work on The Last of Us, yeah, probably for the best, because I'm pretty sure the Naughty Dog of today isn't the same Naughty Dog that was there in, you know, 2005, 2001, whatever. It's a bit of a shame, to be perfectly honest, considering the fact that, again, I don't want to say that I'm one of those people that's like, oh, well, I mean, if I'm not in full control 100% of the time, it just isn't a good game, and all games today are just cinematic, talk on the radio while you walk slowly sort of games, but at the same time, though, I think Naughty Dog had met the balance, or at least beforehand. I don't know, maybe I'm just talking out of my arse, but it's just been something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, because there seems to be this really big divide between games in a pure sense, in the sense that fuck story, fuck everything else, and just so long as it plays, it's cool. And then there have been people who prefer a more experience-based experience, which a lot of people tend to misconstrue as just saying, I want to walk down a hallway and play interactive cutscenes, which... Well, I mean, there is an audience for that, because... I mean, while visual novels will probably remain as popular as they ever were, there is still a whole idea of, you know... fuck, what was it? Like, I think the term is graphic adventure now, like akin to The Walking Dead, and, fuck me, I forgot what else. Pretty much the evolution of the point-and-click genre meets, something along the lines of, I guess, puzzle elements in a 3D space. I don't really know what you'd call it, but something along those lines. I don't know, there's a balance to be met, but a lot of people seem to think it's very cut and dry. And I think the 6th generation actually kind of met that balance between cinematic gaming and, you know, general video game fun time quite well. Which is part of the reason why it is my favorite, well, my favorite period of video games of all time, because it still had some of those, you know, earlier generation elements there, but at the same time it also felt like an evolution of the concept without having to sacrifice gameplay for cinematic elements while also having to, you know, having some gameplay which you could just say, you know what, let's suspend our reality for a moment and just have fun as we double jump while going through this cinematic narrative. I don't know. I do kind of hope that games in the whether in the late 8th or 9th generations really do kind of make a bit of a return to, and just meet that balance, because I just kind of get tired of the arguments from a lot of people just wanting either one or the other. Yeah. What are those enemies called, by the way? I was never really sure. I think their name might be N-E-Me, you know, keeping with the N puns that a lot of the Cortex villains have, but I think that might have been a fan name, I'm not too sure. And anyway, this is my favourite polar level in the game because of the sunset hue. I mean, say what you will about Naughty Dog as a company, but, like, I mean, in terms of visuals, they've always been pretty standout comparatively to a lot of their other competition. They've always found a way to make the hardware work to their advantage, and I felt like the lighting of the Crash Bandicoot games was always a... Well, I mean, to me it's very nostalgic, but at the same time it also has a very cool sense of utilizing the material. It's especially in the way in which the lighting reflects upon the snow. I don't know, it just feels very homely and warm, which is, I guess, part of what attracted me to the game, which... Oh no, it wasn't pure gameplay that attracted me to the game, it was... I'm just a fucking casual. fuck it, whatever. I'm not gonna be cynical, I'm going to be positive and energized, because that's how I feel. Actually, it's not how I feel, I'm dying inside. Actually, no, I'm not. There are actually some really funny death animations here as well. Like, I mean, if you crash into a wall, he'll fall down. If you fall into the water, he'll turn into an ice block. And actually, if you get blown up by a TNT, Crash will actually end up taking the polar bear with him. So, yeah, if I'm dying, I'm taking you with me, my dear little polar bear. Actually, while we're on the subject, polar bears are actually very fucking violent. In fact, they're actually one of the few species that actively goes after humans because human flesh is very tasty. I don't know, it's just a bit of a weird juxtaposition. But, yeah, let's just say when Polar ended up getting his... Actually, is the polar bear a girl or a boy? I can't quite remember. I'm pretty sure it might be a dude, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, might explain why he attacks Crash with a baseball bat, although that might also be for a certain sick thing that a lot of people do in this game, where they try and jump on the polar bear, which is, wrong, because they're a freak. And, also, so I can mention it quickly here, yes, this is Cortex Castle from Crash 1. And actually, if you look towards the distance, you can actually see Insanity Island and the second island from Crash 1 as well. It's a neat little Easter egg reference, even if nothing really comes of this secret hub world. I think it's also the place where the 100% ending takes place, where, well, you'll probably see as we go on. But nonetheless, yeah. In fact, it's not something that really occurred to me until I started commentating over it, but I just realized how much of Crash Bandicoot 2 really does take from the first game in terms of trying to evolve the formula, because there are a lot of level tropes reused from Crash 1, but at the same time it also refines a lot of it. But also, given the way in which it's designed on an artistic standpoint, it doesn't really ring true, because this is actually meant to be a sequel to the Darkness levels from Crash 1. It doesn't really... well, in a certain respect, and more so in terms of the aesthetical detail, because, I mean, you can see everything laid out in the darkness, you can see Cortex's ruined castle in the distance, and while the darkness elements won't make a return until very much later in the game, it is still something where, you know, for what it's worth, it pays tribute and it works well. Yeah, in terms of levels though, I really do like the design elements of this one. It's very... I don't know, I've always been a fan of the ancient ruin setting. It has some very interesting design elements, which can be really cool depending upon the culture that the game is trying to depict. Like, I mean, I'd say in terms of the sort of games which really does have the appeal, it's Devil May Cry for one. In the original game, when you're like outside of the castle areas, and gotta be honestly, Sonic and the Secret Rings actually, which I have. Well, for those of you wondering, I have played, although I don't have the Wii anymore, because that belongs to my sister and she took that off to university. I should probably ask her that back, actually, because I wouldn't mind doing a commentary over Sonic and the Secret Rings at some point, but then again, I'm just getting ahead of myself. Regardless of such, though, temple levels, they're cool. I honestly thought I'd have more to say on that matter, but whatever. We have our gem, and now we may return to the level at hand. I think I might have already mentioned the soundtrack, but Crash 2... I don't want to say it's my favourite soundtrack, but it does have a lot of tracks that I do like. In fact, I don't think I can really... Save for maybe Wrath of Cortex, I don't think I could ever really pinpoint a Crash game that has my favourite soundtrack, so to speak. Excuse me, but there are a lot of tracks in Crash games that I do like, and I think this one is one that I do like. My throat is becoming dry. I guess in terms of bonus levels, I should probably talk about that. I mean, I think I might have alluded to this earlier. If I didn't, then I apologize for repeating myself, but... yeah, you don't have a box count, which tallies the amount of boxes that you have to collect, the amount of boxes that you have to... fuck, what was the word? To the amount of boxes that you might have missed, so... Which is something that Crash 3 did improve upon, but I think the thing... that really gets me, in terms of bonus levels here, is that... I don't know. It is a way to farm extra lives at the same time. I suppose I should probably get into the mentality playing this game, because, I mean, there is always the idea that you can... that 100%ing a Crash game is a decent challenge, which I would say that it is, but at the same time, though, I don't think there really is anything stopping you from... just, you know, doing a vanilla run and going, fuck it, getting 25 crystals is good enough for me, because I was actually I forgot what it was. I was actually rewatching again. I was watching TGX, who I mentioned all the way at the beginning of the commentary. I was watching the TGX review of Twinsanity and how he was complaining about the plotline of Crash Twinsanity, which I never really had a problem with because of how nebulous the plot in a Crash game really is, which might sound hypocritical of me, considering that how much I tend to bitch about, you know, the Sonic series a lot. For me, it was really a sort of sense of how much a story really has to lose by nature of how fleshed out its characters and universe are. And in the sense of Crash, I think you can honestly get away with it to a certain extent, because while there is a difference in vision as the games go on from, you know, Traveler's Tales, Naughty Dog, and to Radical Entertainment and Vicarious Visions, there is still, you know, while there is a certain plot, it's never really been treated with such importance that, you know, if, say, a certain character was changed to such a significant degree, it wouldn't really rise the same sort of ire as, say, like, you know, Shadow from Sonic Adventure 2 compared to Shadow the Hedgehog, where he's a lot more flanderized. Anyway, this is the secret I was talking about earlier, because, Jesus fucking Christ, you would not think to go down there. I mean, especially considering the fact that, you know, a dangerous fucking polar bear that wants to rip your skin off and floss your teeth with its spine is going to eat your flesh, and the fact that bottomless pits equal death just... Again, I don't want to harp on this any more than I already have to, but this is just bullshit, and god damn, this level brings back a lot of painful memories for me, because even now this level's a bit of a pain in the ass, because you have to time your jumps extremely fucking well. Things like this is what really... like, you just have to deal with so much shit, especially having to carefully jump, but also making sure that you're quick enough to dodge the bullets. I don't know, it's not fun. It's not fun. This, I think, is the worst of it. You know, and especially with the armored armadillos, not to be confused with the Mega Man X Maverick. You have to destroy their armor, and then you have to, you know, kind of jump over them, all the while dodging a bullet. So yeah, make sure that you have an Aku Aku on hand, and make sure that you are skilled enough to keep him, because if not, it is very, very dangerous and very much a pain in the ass. And more bonus missions. Wonderful. But yeah, this is also the last of the chase levels. No more Boulder and the Polar Bear. I don't think makes a return until Crash Bash, which I haven't played. But yeah, well, I haven't played and I haven't had the interest to buy it because I have no friends and I'm fucking lonely as shit. But on the whole, looks decently okay-ish. Anyway, onwards to more adventure. Now you might think we're going to be running on foot again, but what is this? Oh no wait, we don't. We're not at the third tier yet. Oopsie daisies, I was about to spoil something very dear to this game, which is fun. I will say though, these chase levels are actually some of the more tense parts of the game, especially on your first time through, because yeah, this level scared me to death and was the bane of my existence first time playing. Especially when you got to the polar bear and you just didn't come to expect it. Oh, and another nice thing is that, unlike the Boulder and Crash 1, the animals and Boulder, retrospectively, will actively get the boxes, so you don't have to worry about it not counting, unlike in Crash 1, where you did have to make sure you get them perfectly, otherwise just fuck off and die. Crash 3 and Wrath of Cortex would also follow that, which is very lovely. Whee! And we just killed that little bear's mother, which is probably the reason why it wants to kill Crash and Twinsanity. Which is actually one of my favourite gags of the game, especially considering the fact that Crunch shows up thinking that it's a legitimate birthday party. I don't know, Crash Twinsanity is a game that I hold dear to my heart. Anyway, what is this? This is another little secret that is... I'm willing to give it a pass because it's something that you don't really think you can do on the outset, but if you honestly are just that curious, you can do it. I don't know, I mean, it's a lot better than just diving into a hole willy-nilly because you're fucking curious. Anyway, now we get to another polar level, which is basically the animal riding levels if it was in Silent Hill. Basically, they use darkness and you pretty much just have to have decent reflexes. This will take you a fairly decent amount of time, like a lot of the 2 secret levels will, but other than that though, decent challenge and honestly something that can be quite fun on the outset. Whee! Also something which takes advantage of pressing the circle button, which... excuse me, just drink my Pepsi. It's something that takes advantage of the circle button, which will give you a short boost. It's not much, but it is something that can let you complete the level faster if you so choose to, but just don't go trigger happy with it because you will run into something inevitably and you will die. Yeah, also you have these, I have no idea what they're called. I used to call them postmen, but I know that they're one of the Cortex goons. Which, as we find out later, are actually robots, and in Crash 3 we actually see the facility where they're created. I don't know, it's weird. I'm pretty sure they're called Enemy, although I'm pretty sure officially they've just been called the Lab Assistant. I don't know. Also, we have these very Crash 1 looking warp rooms, and now we get our third boss of the game. This is Tiny Tiger, who I believe... I don't know if this was in the American version or the European version, but I believe if you pause the menu, he was initially called Taz Tiger, which was probably changed to avoid copyrights from a certain Warner Brothers character, but you know how it is. Tiny was actually, I think, the character that I think suffered the most in terms of the Crash Bandicoot Crash of the Titans remake. Well, I mean, I say remake, but it's part of the same series, but... They gave him a Mike Tyson voice and, like, altered his personality to be very sort of apologetic, where he's more like, oh my god, I wish I didn't have to come to this, I totally respect your work, and something along those lines, which is very fucking bizarre, and something that I honestly would count as something of a betrayal of the franchise, a little bit more so than I would, like, say, any other Crash game post the Naughty Dog era. I don't know, it's just kind of strange, really. Anyway, Tiny's boss fight can be deceptively difficult if you don't know what you're doing, but it is something that I think most first-timers can get through with relative to no troubles. It's just about knowing where to jump and making sure that you position yourself correctly. Anyway, fourth tier of Hub Worlds. I'd argue one of the weaker points of the game, although it does hold a nice variety of levels, but at the same time it also has Cold Hard Crash, which can suck phallic objects, which I'm not going to name because the kiddies might be watching, but then again, if children are watching my videos, then, sorry, parents, but your kids are radical, although that probably following a role model that they don't want to follow, because let's just say you don't want to end up like me, kiddies. Yes, you don't want to end up like poor, dear old Skully, cynical about life, looking for the sweet release of death, living day to day, not knowing what tomorrow may bring, desperately trying to hold on to a chaotic world that knows no peace, forever bound in space and time, trapped living a repetitive cycle day in, day out. Welcome to the Crash Bandicoot 2 commentary, where we go on nihilistic tangents about the bleakness of existence. Ugh, Jesus Christ, my headset is knocking me over so much. Anyway, just be careful around here, because there are some of these cameras that do move around quite a fair bit, and well, I mean, if you're not quick enough, you'll be getting a Lancer up the arse. Don't even know why I was saying that. But again, this is actually mostly hanging based, as the level is called. I believe it is called hanging out with my family, having ourselves a party. I don't know, just keep on your toes and you should be alright. This is also another level with a bit of a secret entrance to the warp stages. I can't remember. Excuse me, I can't remember if I showed off or not, but anyway, it leads you to Totally Fly. I think it leads you to Totally Fly, but that remains to be seen. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure it does lead you to Totally Fly, if I remember correctly. Which is another secret level and is an example of what I was talking about earlier with the Darkness level from Crash 1. The other half of its soul, so to speak. These bonus rooms aren't really anything that much to speak of. I mean, it's a way of grinding lives if you're just doing a vanilla run, but at the same time it's also a place where they have some decent little challenges in order to get all the boxes. I can really sort of take them or leave them for what they are, but again, a fun little distraction if nothing else. I mean, in Crash 1 they were typically rather nebulous, considering the fact that they were really just used to get the password or save. But I mean, even in that case, if you were going for the gems anyway, you would pretty much use them to save regardless, so... take one or leave one, I guess. I suppose if there is really anything else to talk about, actually, and something that I honestly do regret, although it wasn't really helped by my circumstances at the time, but... back a couple of years ago, I used to have this video game store nearby me called Gamer's Paradise, which, well, me and a lot of my friends at the time geniusly nicknamed Stoner's Paradise because we were very fucking witty. And, well, that and a lot of people actually, instead of actually using it for what it was intended for as a place to buy video games and use it to play, you know, local area network parties, it was basically a place where people just went to smoke weed. Anyway, back to the story at hand, I actually ended up seeing a PlayStation 1 there, which was at a very, very cheap price of 50 Australian dollars, which I wanted to pick up, but problem was I had no money. Well, no change there then, because I don't have any money even now. But it's something that I've always regretted, because ever since Stoner's Paradise... God damn, I'm still calling it that even today. Even though Stoner's Paradise shut down, I've wanted to pick it up, but I never did, and I've been kicking myself ever since. I mean, even though I do have a PS2, which is backwards compatible with PS1 games, it still would have been nice to own, even though I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be steadily rising in price to this day. That and also picking up a PlayStation Classic, which was released around December of 2018. Not to say that I don't appreciate it, but I don't really like the selection of games that were on it, especially considering the fact that they had the director's cut of Resident Evil instead of the original. And to me, what should have been rightfully Resident Evil 2 or 3, rather than the original. Or that and Silent Hill 1 I think should have been on there as well. And again, as selfish of it as it is for me to say Final Fantasy VIII, because that is my favourite Final Fantasy game, but... Jesus Christ. I mean, they did have Grand Theft Auto and I believe Revelations Persona, which was on it, which is nice, but... I don't know... Also, on that subject, I don't think any Crash games are actually on it, which is actually very, very surprising, because, I mean, I guess a rights issue with Activision, maybe? I don't know, it's just puzzling, because you would have thought that Crash Bandicoot, at least Crash Bandicoot Warped, would have been one of the top games to be put on the list, but I guess not. One thing that I do like, actually, is that some of the animals in these levels are actually a lot more active than they would be during the levels in the daytime setting, which is a nice bit of attention to detail, actually. Again, the darkness levels also do rely on you to have a bit of blind faith insofar as trying to get the levels... not trying to get the levels, and trying to get the boxes and making sure that your lights last as long as possible, because as you've seen time and time again, if they fly off after they get bored of Crash for a little bit, then, well, you're pretty much fucked by that point. But I mean, other than that though, I mean, while the darkness levels can be a bit harrowing, especially for the one in the final hub area, mostly due to the fact that you have to turn back and, try and backtrack through the levels, it's not exactly something that I don't think a first timer could complete without much trouble. Excuse me. And I wonder why I'm still single. Hey there, girls, my name is Skully. Belch. Fucking hell. Now, this is a level that I like to call Let's Reuse Our Assets. Again, this is pretty much... Well, I mean, I do like the setting, actually. The snow setting with a little bit of dirt and grit to it. I don't know. I really do like the B levels, as I like to call them. Like, I mean, they're not they're not going to blow anybody... They're not going to take anybody's breath away, but... At the same time, though, they are some pretty decent levels with some pretty cool death animations, like Crash being allergic to bees, so that when he gets stung, his hands and head inflate. Which is probably somebody's, well, to take a word out of Murphy Pendleton's diction, somebody's very specific taste in entertainment. But I suppose in terms of anything else, it's also a level that I think has a really cool set of gimmicks, because you can actually hide beneath the dirt if you just press a square button to take a dive beneath it. And that's how you avoid the bees, although you do have to watch out for some of Cortex's lab assistants who will put a sledgehammer over you and erect a gravestone which says, "Rest in peace, Crash. If Activision didn't kill you, then, well, cold hard Crash will." Oh, and yeah, thankfully those exploding TNTs do count, because I was always so paranoid about that on my first few playthroughs that, especially considering that Crash 1 kind of prepared me for that, is that, if the TNT doesn't explode on screen, then then the boxes that end up getting broken won't count. Which was... well, again, I haven't played the Insane Trilogy to be certain, but I hope to God it fixes that, and if it does, then, well, that's a fucking godsend right there. I guess, to go back to the topic of the Insane Trilogy yet again, well, not necessarily the Insane Trilogy itself, but also the concept of remakes in and of itself, is that, while the Crash Insane Trilogy remake, I think is a very decent attempt at, not only just pleasing fans, but also trying to recreate something that a lot of people loved. It is something that I do see being quite cynical, because, I mean, while I can't really confirm this myself, because, again, not a Spyro fan, I do also see a lot of people getting into this mindset of saying that all we have to do to appease, people who are, angrily bashing our current day games for series that aren't being received as well, is hey look, we'll just put the old games through prettier, shinier graphics and hope it sells, rather than doing anything that really goes out of its way to improve the form. I don't want to say that improves the formula, but at the very least gives it a little something. I guess gives it a little something more. I mean, this is something that I have debated on talking about time and time again, but it's a logic that I feel in my own case was a little bit selective, because I mean, while I would use the Resident Evil remake as the de facto example of how to keep the original game's spirit while also updating what needed to be updated and, you know, giving it a certain zest to itself where you could play the original and the remake as a faithful adaptation, but at the same time also be something that's worth standing up on to in its own right. Comparatively to something like the Resident Evil 2 remake, which feels very much like a well, people are still iffy on tank control, so let's just make it like Resident Evil 4, but then put Resident Evil 2 with it while running it on the Resident Evil 7 engine, and make lots of money out of it. I don't know. Well, I mean, that and while also trying to reconfigure the story and do everything else like that. Which I am a little bit iffy on, because I feel like it is very much a case-by-case basis. Although, I guess if I can briefly divert the subject to Resident Evil 2 Remake, I hear that data miners reportedly have found a fixed camera mode, which, I mean, if you can skip to it, I mean, if you can change to that on the outset, then, well, I'll be very fucking appreciative. But, if not, though, in some cases it does feel very much like a cynical attempt to pander towards, I don't know, a much larger audience, so to speak, but then again, that's just, my fears kind of stepping in the way. Oh, my throat's getting dry. My throat is so dry. Sorry for bursting eardrums right there, but in any case, though. Enjoy the ambience of the level. I don't know, the level theme is pretty catchy, though. And now we got our gem, and we are heading on to dangerous territory right next. Cold Hard Crash. Jesus fucking cum-guzzling Christ. Good lord, these games bring out the raunchiness in me. Well, raunchiness, I guess, if you haven't been exposed to the greater internet yet. Cold Hard Crash. A level that on the vanilla run you shouldn't really have a lot of problems with. It's just getting the gem that's really the biggest pain in the arse here. I mean, it's mostly for the amount of shit that you have to do, because, I mean, it not only requires you to, you know, go up a certain platform and, you know, go off and get all the gems that way, but then it requires you to go all the way back without any save points. And, you know, you can't die after you get the gem because you still need to get the box gem, so doing it all is... It's a tall order, and something that could have been far easier than what we ended up getting, but... On the whole, though, I don't think it's quite as, oh god, it's so terrifying, I can't take this anymore, I must commit suicide so that I can avoid the pain, sort of gameplay that a lot of people tend to think about. Also, it has some deceptively hidden crates, which, yes, pretty suckish. But at the same time, though, outside of Cold Hard Crash being kind of sucky, I do enjoy the ice levels for what they are. Well, I mean, that and I also just like the way they look. It's, very pretty. Also, Aku Aku doesn't have a reflection, if you could see in the mirror right there, so, Aku Aku is a vampire. Also, I think story-wise it's very weird, because, I mean, the Crash games have been very inconsistent with Aku Aku's characterization, where... In the earlier Crash games, in the manual for Crash 1, he was characterized as just a witch doctor who wanted to stop Cortex from polluting the island. Which implied that he would communicate with Crash on some level, but in Crash Bandicoot 2, he doesn't really have a voice and just seems to go along with everything. But then cut all the way to Crash 3 and he suddenly starts talking and then has a personality and backstory with Uka Uka and everything else, and then... I don't know, it just seems a little bit inconsistent. I don't know, I mean, that's honestly what I kind of mean with how I view Crash Bandicoot's story as a little bit nebulous comparatively to, say, well, pretty much any other game in... fuck, what was it? Like, I mean, I guess Sonic as one example of it, but also a game that does try and throw cutscenes in your face. I mean, I guess... in the sense that, you know, while there are a few details that do get a bit skewed, changed, and retconned to a certain extent, it's not something where it's like... where it's so integral to the series' DNA that, you know, no matter how good the gameplay is, it can't supersede, you know, the context of the story, which, you know, for as much as Crash Bandicoot has changed, whether it be through the variations with, you know, the Traveller's Tales games or the Radical Entertainment Mind of a Mutant games, it's at the same time something where you know, it's nebulous enough and it didn't really take itself seriously to the point of I didn't really feel like my investment was betrayed, whereas if I take something like Sonic, for example, and, you know, you have games like Sonic Adventure through, you know, Sonic Unleashed and Black Knight, which, you know, want me to get invested in the characters, want me to get invested in the plot and story. But then, you know, on the outset of Sonic and, you know, some of the more recent games, it was like, hey, it's wacky cartoon, no fun to be had here, yay! Jibba jabba dibbity bobba bibbity bobbity boop, I don't know why I turned this into a bizarre character, into a goddamn southern stereotype, shoney! That was probably a little bit racy, I apologize for that, but, yeah, I mean, a story that goes from serious to more light-hearted, I don't really have a problem with, and likewise if it, you know, starts from the light and no, not light and softiness, the lighter tone towards a more darker tone, I don't really have a problem with. It's all more to do with how you handle the characters, which again, if I could relay it back to TGX's Twinsanity review, I guess was what he was getting at the end of the day. At the same time though, if the plot overall is very nebulous, regardless of the, like, throughout a good chunk of the series, unless of course it wants me to take it seriously, then, well, I'm not really going to be complaining about it, because it just sort of is what it is, and I guess you could argue that in the case of Sonic, within certain instances, it is very much, it is what it is, and you can't really complain about it for not being dark enough for your expectations, but by that same volition though, if you're gonna go out of your way to make me care about the characters in the universe only to immediately destroy that, then why the hell should I care? I don't know, I just dislike it when franchises just play the card of, oh, you should care about the characters, except when you don't have to, because it's a game, you gotta do the fighting and the kicking and the punching, it's about gameplay. Sort of card, which it is frustrating, and even in that case, they do usually shove cutscenes down your throat to the point of annoyance, which tackles a certain game which a lot of people love that I don't, which I am really debating on whether or not I want to review it or not, because I mean, it is a game with a very passionate fanbase which views it as the best game in the series, but I don't know, it ruined the legacy of a character which I thought was handled decently up until I found out the character's motivations, and you probably don't even know what I'm talking about right now, but let's just say, if you can get this reference, then you'll know what I'm talking about. No talking. That probably isn't a very descriptive hint, but yeah. For those of you who know what it is, you shall get a cuddle from me. A lovely spooning cuddle where we will cuddle under the sheets, read you a nice little bedtime story, have a bit of pillow talk, talk about the fears that tomorrow may bring, have a passionate fuck, and then we will... What the fuck am I even saying anymore? Whatever. I'm too torn down to talk about it, really. My throat's going dry, and I'm talking like a little bit of a southern prospector. Just like I did in the Sly Raccoon commentary where I talked about a burger with steak, peanuts, cheese, onions. I'm gonna stop that now because that's getting annoying. This is also a level that does bring back one of the gimmicks from Crash 1 with the toxic barrel levels, where if you'll remember in Crash 1 you couldn't really do that quite as easily because you had to sideswipe out of the way and kind of maneuver yourself through the Z-axis, which you have very little time to do, and the barrels are very deceptive considering the fact that they bounce and are also on a slope somewhat, so it makes judging your distance very difficult in some instances, but that is one of the things that you do come across in the death routes of this area, and I will say that it is a lot better in terms of having to balance it out, but other than that though, nothing to really get concerned about. Excuse me. Jesus Christ. There we go, gem platform. It is weird actually, and I don't know if this is a quirk with the European version, because I mean, I guess, to give a bit of context compared to the American version of Crash 2, as far as the death route's concerned, if you step on a death route in the US version, provided you die on the death route and you come back and try again, the death route will always remain there permanently. Whereas in the European version, if you die on the death route just once, it'll be gone for good, so yeah, you can't fuck up on this, and even then, like, I mean, if you try and prepare for it by getting a few extra lives and then turning back to the death route, if you pass it after a certain threshold, the death route is gone for good. Because I guess the game assumes that, well, you're not going after the death route to begin with, so, fuck it, we won't bother to... Well, I guess we won't bother to allow the player to access the death route anymore, which is a little bit bullshit, but... I don't know, it just gives you the instance to not fuck up. And I just noticed how loud the rain is in this level. I don't know, it just seems a bit bizarre to me. More balancing, which plays hell on my depth perception. I don't know about anybody else, but especially with these ones, it's a little bit harrowing. I forgot what those lizards are called. Fucking fraud neck lizards, I think. Can't remember. They don't. In real life, they don't have as cool designs. I suppose another thing I should probably get into is enemy detail. But in terms of enemies in this game, you're not actually fighting Cortex's goons because why the hell would he stop Crash from doing something if he's working with him? But yeah, these are actually minions that belong to Dr. Brio, which I believe. Well, it's kind of a case-by-case basis because some of them are working for Cortex, some of them are working for Brio, I guess, in an attempt to stop Brio's minions from gathering the crystal. The real way to tell is that the animals with the more bionic implants are those who belong to Cortex, and the ones that are genetic belong to Brio, which are basically all organic composition. Anyway, back again. Now we have another fucking level like this. This level, I think, takes advantage of it more than the previous one did, where you can dive into the ground and stealth your way through. I do very much enjoy this sort of level, although it is something that I can really just take or leave for what it is. I do like these levels, but I just don't really have that much to say about them. They don't have a lot of contextual flavour to them. And I guess that's another thing as well, because Crash Bandicoot 2 doesn't just take place in Australia, well, actually, I think for the most part it does. It just sort of warps Crash around the country, because contrary to popular belief from those who live in lands beyond, there is snow in Australia. You just have to go to... Well, I mean, you have to go to, like, around Victoria or South Australia to really... Actually, no, not South Australia, I'd say New South Wales to really find it. Going to places like Perisher Valley, Mount Buller, and a couple of other places. Then again, I'm saying that as somebody who doesn't live in New South Wales, so you can cross that off your list if you live there, trying to hunt me down and exterminate me. I think I might have alluded to where I am in the past, but I won't give that out, because let's just say for the sake of argument that I live on the Wampa Islands, and Crash is my neighbour. Yes. In fact, he's even out the window right now. Hello, Crash! Oh! See? You could hear him, even though it sounds like he was talking into this microphone. Oh, what the fuck am I even saying anymore? Life has become so unclear. I am constantly seeing evil where there is not. You see, this is what happens when I talk unprepared. You get a taste of my very scatterbrained personality. And the reason why I am so lonesome. Probably been driven mad by centuries of just talking to myself. In fact, I think that's honestly what these games have kind of done to me. Well, I mean, I will say that talking as a commentary has improved my diction, so to speak. I don't really mumble as much as I used to. And at the same time, I also have a sense of flow about myself where I can just constantly talk about anything, really, without necessarily stopping for the sake of sapient thought, which I do on the occasion while I try to think up the appropriate word. By the way, a very cool hidden secret, and one that I actually appreciate, those nitro boxes. It actually has a very subtle tell. They don't bubble and fizz, and I believe in the beta version of the game they actually had a Wumpa fruit indicating for you to where to go. You see, that's a little thing we call actual decent game design. You know, not fucking, oh, well, you know, you have to go to a bottomless pit, and, you know, because the growler's there. Rawr, rawr. Even though we said that, you know, you die if you fall into a bottomless pit. Again, Naughty Dog have moments of genius, but they're held back by fucking stupid shit. But anyway, that's enough shit talking about the Naughty Dog. Even though I'm pretty sure half the staff isn't even fucking there anymore. Or at least the staff that made the Crash and Jack games. And I guess even the early Uncharted titles, now that I think about it. I don't know, I haven't really picked up a Naughty Dog title since Uncharted 3, to be honest, and again, while I don't want to say that they are full-on cinematic David Cage sort of the art kind of games, The Last of Us didn't really have that much of an appeal for me. It's not necessarily because of the fault of the game itself, even if I don't really like the mechanics all that much. It's mostly to do with the fact that I just dislike the apocalypse genre as a whole at this stage. And like, I mean, this is a problem that I also found with Telltale's The Walking Dead series as well when I play those games, but whatever. You know what, I think if I ever get around to covering The Walking Dead Season 1, I might talk about it there, but for the time being I must save my throat, because now we have another boss fight with Engine, which, yeah, the boss fights peak here. Also, there is a very interesting continuity snafu insofar as Cortex, how Crash goes along with Cortex's plan, because I mean, the main plot of the game is that Crash gathers the crystals for Cortex, and he gives them into Cortex to save the planet. Engine comes along and says, like Dr. Cortex said, give the crystals you've gathered to me. And Crash doesn't do that and decides to fight him, so what the hell happened here? I mean, does Crash see the giant robot and goes, oh dear, I better smash him up? I don't really understand what he's thinking here, and Engine just decides to attack him for literally no reason, whereas if he just said, please give me the crystals, Crash, you know, he probably would have handed them over willy-nilly, but I don't know, like, I mean, I don't want to say that Crash Bandicoot 2's plot is outright terrible, but I don't know, it's nebulous enough so that I don't really care that much, but at the same time, though, it's something that is a little bit eyebrow-raising. And not to mention the fact that, I know this is meant to subtly foreshadow that, yes, Cortex is ultimately evil at the end of the day, but at the same time, though, the dude has the last 3 crystals on the space station, and I mean, if they really wanted to do this whole Cortex redemption arc, they should have just cut out the opening cutscene and had Brio be the main villain. I don't know, I feel like it could have been interesting, rather than just having a main villain for the sake of it. And I guess, I mean, I did mention it earlier, but it is also something where they tried to make Brio into something of an anti-hero, where he was trying to save the world and was only really being used by Cortex because his major love was being a bartender. I don't know, Crash... You see, this is what I mean. Like, I mean, you try and invest in the plot of Crash Bandicoot, but it's so nebulous that who cares, to be perfectly fucking honest. And I mean, granted, I don't typically like saying that about, you know, franchises, because that doesn't invalidate the plot problems that a lot of people like, you know, the aforementioned TGX typically has with the series, but, you know, I mean, if you're gonna treat your plot as nebulous, then quite frankly, I'm not gonna give a shit. Like, I mean, even something, like, again, I brought it up before and time again, but even something like Shadow the Hedgehog, for as poorly written as the game can be at times, you know, if the character's treated as something important, then so am I. And even if it is poorly written, if there's some good intent behind it, then, you know, I can't really fault it for, you know, liking an effort or just being, you know what, fuck it, nobody's really gonna give a shit. It's about gameplay! And again, you know, gameplay for me is what is ultimately, at the end of the day, most important about a video game, but, you know, for me, it's also context and, you know, it's about, you know, premise and, you know, the gameplay itself intertwining with each other to sell an experience, because, I mean, take Castlevania, for example. You know, who the hell is Simon Belmont? He's a guy who hunts vampires, so naturally, you want to feel like a vampire hunter, you want to overcome challenges, and you want to feel like a badass. And, you know, the gameplay is there to reflect the experience that you're trying to create. Like, I mean, Metal Gear Solid, for example, you're not going to be taking on people as like a one-man army like Doom Guy, for example. You're going to be sneaking around the enemy, you're going to be dealing with a political conspiracy, you're going to be dealing with, you know, warfare and weaponry. And again, you know, you're going to be in the experience of a soldier that has to rely on his wits and, you know, tactics to get out of a situation. And, you know, even Doom, for example, and even as, I think it was like fuck, who was it again? Was it Adrian Carmack, I think, or was it, somebody else? I forgot who it was, I'm so sorry about this, but, again, they said something along the lines of story doesn't really matter in a video game, but I don't think it was really story in the sense of, you know, cutscenes, because, as I keep on saying, the story in a video game isn't just about cutscenes, it's about, you know, atmosphere, tone, level progression, difficulty, and, you know, the way in which the mechanics tie into the gameplay and level design itself, that ultimately culminate in an experience which you can tell without having a single word of dialogue uttered. And that's not to say that all games have to be, you know, this one single experience, or that games can't, you know, go for a more cinematic approach, akin to, you know, to the Telltale method, or to the David Cage, or excuse me, even to the arguably the more cinematic Naughty Dog games like, you know, the latter day Uncharted and the Last of Us video games that tend to have gotten. Like, I mean, there are ways to do the game, but it's just something where people are very much one way or the other about the game, and it's, I don't know, it's just something that I feel a lot of people just tend to misconstrue a lot of the time. Whether or not because they're so set in their ways for at least one extent, or whether or not it's, I don't know, fuck it, I don't know. My throat is tired and my brain is frazzled. Mostly probably from the booze I've been drinking, actually. Yeah, I'm not drunk, because I do at least have some sense of sapient thought, but, yeah, I'm a little bit sauced and dry right now. And I'm gonna be going right back to right back to celebrations with family just as soon as I'm done here, because I've got to Well, I mean, I'm not really doing a lot of editing on this. In fact, as soon as I export this and post it to YouTube, that's pretty much me for the rest of the afternoon, which I'll hopefully post this up tonight if I can. So while people in the US will probably be experiencing this on the 24th, people in Australia will be seeing this on the 25th. So, if on the offhand that any of my Australian viewers are watching, well, happy Australia Day, mate. Yeah. You know, in hindsight, maybe I probably should have covered a more Australian-based game from, like, Chrome Studios or whatever, like the Tasmanian Tiger, which I actually haven't seen a copy of in years. I used to see it around a lot in my local video shops like Civic Video and Video Easy and Blockbuster back when it used to be down here, but haven't seen it since, which fucking sucks, really. I mean, I suppose Crash Bandicoot used a lot of its Australian influence very sparingly. Like, I mean, it's really only prevalent in Crash 1 because while you could make the connection that Papu Papu and a lot of the native tribesmen look very meant to be based on, you know, Aboriginal Australians, at the same time, it's also something which feels like it took more influence from, I guess generic sort of tribal culture, so to speak, but I don't know. In terms of anything else, though, like, I mean, fuck, I forgot where I was going with this. And yeah, this is where you find out that the lab goons are cyborgs. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but I suppose I'll probably bring it up for the sake of a talking point, but I do wonder where they're going to go with the Crash series from here on out, because, I mean, I feel like delivering another Crash Bandicoot experience a la, you know, Crash Bandicoot Warped and Crash 2, 3, and Warped and Wrath of Cortex would probably be doing it a bit of a disservice, because, I mean, in that sense, aren't you just... outside of maybe the level designs and the gimmicks being a little bit different, aren't you just essentially recreating the same game twice and essentially repeating the same mistakes that Wrath of Cortex did, albeit with a little bit better time constraints and a better budget to work with? I don't know. It's kind of to the degree where I feel like Crash to Insanity was the real evolution of the genre. Which, I mean, despite the fact that it did borrow a few elements from Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy in an ironic twist, it is something where I do feel that, you know... I mean, there are a lot of people even now clamoring for a Crash to Insanity remake with all the cut content restored in the game, and... I mean, honestly, if they could take some of the better elements of Twinsanity, then I'd be chuffed as hell. Anyway, I believe somebody else has just arrived home with alcohol, I think. Anyway, apologise for that. That's actually the only reason I momentarily pause during a lot of commentaries and such like that. I mean, it's not because I couldn't talk for hours on end, but... And again, it is actually very much a pain in the ass when I'm recording commentaries and filming, because I have people that get very irate and ask what the hell I'm doing. Because of the fact that well, I have a bit of a booming voice, and that I also talk to myself a lot, which is rather confusing for a lot of people, and then I have to explain what I'm doing, and they just tell me to do other things, and life gets in the way, but then again, you know how it is. Basically, just trying to do what I can, when I can. Anyway, this is the Darkness level, which has a... God damn, I gotta stop coughing. Which has a bit of a unique gimmick to it. Well, I say unique, but it has a bit of a bullshit gimmick, because you have to essentially backtrack through the level in the darkness, which, unless of course you have pixel-perfect memorization, you're not going to be doing it on the first try, but you know how it is. If you have your wits about you, you'll be able to do it fine. And it's just about knowing to keep your light for as long as possible. I also think the light lasts for a little bit longer when you're doing that section as well, just to give you enough time, but yeah, it can be a bit harrowing at certain aspects. I also really like the crunchy sound effects of the bumper fruit, actually. I don't know, it just sounds very delicious to eat. Which I believe they're meant to be... I don't know what they're meant to be. I think they're meant to be like a hybrid of like peaches and apples. I don't know, but I've never really been certain on it. They actually do kind of look a little bit like a mango as well. Never really been sure, to be honest, but anyway, they look delicious, and I'd like to taste a Wumpa Fruit, which apparently is purple on the inside, if one of the animations from Crash 1 is anything to go by, where Crash spins a Wumpa Fruit in his finger, lifts it up, and then it splatters all over him. And this comes the fun part of the level, where you have to navigate around blindly. I'm curious to see if the Insane Trilogy is any better in this regard, if it has like a more fainter outline so that you'd be able to better navigate through the darkness, but I can't really say for certain because I haven't played the game. Although, then again, I am curious to see how well the game looks with a much better lighting engine on their hands, which I'd imagine probably does look pretty crisp, considering some of the screenshots I've seen. Most especially with the night-themed levels of Crash Warped. But in any case, onwards to new adventures. We also have the jetpack levels, which I negated to comment on last time. A lot of people have a lot of problems with the jetpack levels for not being as free-flowing or playing as fluidly as they would like, but to be perfectly honest, I don't really mind them all that much. Like, I mean, I guess a lot of people probably wanted them to play similar to, I guess, Space Harrier for the Master System, but yeah, on the whole, I think these jetpack sections control fine. I mean, they are a bit rigid, but other than that, though, it's fine enough for me. Oh, and by the way, you don't take damage if you touch the corded parts of the electric cables. It's only if you touch the sides, which, again, I don't fault people for thinking that if you touch it at all, you take damage, but yeah, it just goes to show a message about electrical safety. Remember, kiddies, play it safe around electricity, says Louis the Lightning Bug. Which, to be perfectly honest, I don't really remember so much for the Lightning Bug ads as much as I do for the parody amendment thing from The Simpsons, which was like, I'm an amendment to be, yes, an amendment to be. And I'm hoping that they'll ratify me. We've got a lot of flag burners who have got too much freedom, and I want to make it legal for policemen to beat them, yes, and... fuck, I'm not gonna sing anymore. Anyway, I really do like the look of these levels as well, especially this section right here, which reminds me more of a game show for some reason. I don't know, it's fun. It's kind of weird that the jetpack was bigged up as a major selling point for Crash Bandicoot 2, and it ended up being a sort of level thing which didn't really come to pass. I don't know. I mean, I think they did make better use out of it in one of the... it was one of the GBA games. I think it was the Huge Adventure, actually, which had a very Space Harrier-inspired jetpack level, but... yeah, you can take it or leave it, really. And anyway, now we're up to the final level of Piston It Away, which is exactly what people did to their credibility when they sold Crash off to Activision. I don't know. I really do hope that the future of the Crash Bandicoot series involves them actually evolving the formula than pandering to nostalgia, because, I mean, while people have gotten their favourite version of Crash back, I think it does kind of leave a question hanging over to where the games will go now, because, I mean, while some franchises like Resident Evil 7, for example, have found their footing with, you know, the generic sort of first-person amnesia, slender, whatever horror sort of format that they have now, there are certain games which, while feeling like a product of their time and I would like to return, there are some that a lot of people do. I mean, I think I'm probably a little bit more tolerant in that respect because I actively enjoy games from the 6th generation, even if they haven't really aged the best, but there are a lot of people that would argue that wouldn't do well in this day and age because they're pussies. No, I'm just kidding, but... I completely forgot where I was going with that, but... Anyway, the point being is that I hope the Crash series has a very prosperous future ahead of it. Anyway, last level. I suppose... well, I mean, I'll wrap up my final thoughts on the Crash Bandicoot game once we get to the end of it. Because, again, the reason why I'm also doing these as an all-the-monster commentary is that I don't really have much to say on the Crash games, which is... part of why I don't really want to review the Naughty Dog era Crash games, because, I mean, one, I feel like they've been done to death. And two, well, given the Insane trilogy, I don't think they really need the coverage, which is why, instead of reviewing something like Crash Bandicoot 2, I instead reviewed Wrath of Cortex back around 2016, which, again, provided that I can... oh, I don't know. Twinsanity, I think, is definitely on the list of games that I want to take a look at, because Twinsanity is fucking delicious, and then, what is this? Another cutscene. And yes, to the shock of nobody, Cortex is the villain. A twist that nobody saw coming if you didn't watch the intro cutscene and you decided to go off and go to the toilet, get yourself a snack, file out your taxes, drink a Pepsi, reconnect with your loved ones, have sex with a girlfriend or boyfriend, or just smoke a joint. Crash, you fucking moron! Cortex is evil! Nah. I really like Aku Aku's face during these cutscenes as well. He's like looking at the audience as if you really expect us to buy this shit. You are so like a snarky version of Aku Aku. But then again, this was before he was kind of prophesized as sort of wise, sagely character. I don't know. It's a little bit strange, but we can deal with it. It is really sad to say that this is also the last game where Cortex ever really comes off as a threat, which is retroactively undermined by Crash 3, which ends up making his schemes all the result of Uka Uka, and now we get the final boss, which according to Matthew Mattelli of SGB Likes to Play is Jetpack. Hit him 3 times and it's over. The biggest pain in the arse of this level is the asteroids, but even in that case you should have no trouble catching up to Cortex because, well, again, outside of the jetpack and trolls, there really is no threat here. Just spin into him and that's it. I shit you not, that is it. I mean, there is a little, like, warp ring that shows what happens if he gets away, but yeah, that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much it, actually. This is also the bad ending, which you pretty much have to get by default in the first time playthrough. You get a nice little recreation of Insanity Beach, Crash and Coco are just lying down, not giving a fuck, and Cortex's space station is still up there, so yeah, the game's not over yet. Anyway, after loading a previous save file, I will show you the ending. Also, sorry for hurting any epileptic people in the audience, but yeah, bit of a flush coming up here. There we go. And now we have all the gems and all the crystals, and this is pretty much the result of what we get. The laser, which is positioned on top of Cortex's tower. I gotta say though, like, I mean, despite Naughty Dog being pretty spot on with the animation department, this isn't quite the best. But again, that's more of a minor complaint. He's already standing on the button, so shouldn't it be firing anyway? Oh well. Anyway, Cortex's space station is destroyed, and, well, we'll be continuing this in Crash 3. And that, my dear old friends, as the lightsaber flies away from Cortex's ship, was Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Out of all the Naughty Dog trilogy, I'd say this one is probably my favourite, because it's a very concisely and tightly developed game, improves what needed to be improved over the first game, and on the whole, well, it's just a title that I think is just really does go above and beyond and really learning from your mistakes from Crash 1 while just overall improving the gameplay. Soundtrack is something I really enjoy, and again, you know, both in terms of the voice acting, for what little of it there is, and the animation department, I think it's all pretty solid. Compared to a game like Crash 3, for example, which, you know what, I think I'll save my thoughts on Crash 3 for when we get to it next year. Provided that nothing gets in my way, but again, despite my rambly commentary, I think this pretty much does cover everything that I need to say on Crash Bandicoot 2. It is a good game. A game that, again, as I mentioned earlier with the Insane trilogy, I don't think really needed a remake, but again, you can pretty much play this game just as good now as you could in 1997, so if you're somebody who, like me, was feeling the need to play some more nostalgic games from the late 90s to early 2000s, I would highly recommend Crash Bandicoot 2. It's a very solid time from beginning to end, and while some may argue that Crash 3 dwarfs it in a few aspects, well, again, it's very much an apples to oranges situation, and Crash Bandicoot 2 on the whole is still a very top-notch experience that I do recommend playing. It does have its moments of bullshit, however, like I mentioned before, with some of the hidden gems being hidden in places which you wouldn't really think to look unless, of course, you're a snobby bitch who, well, quite frankly, should just get a punch in the face because you suck. Yeah, see, even Cortex is laughing at you. Take that! But anyway, I'm Solidus-Skully, keep it new metal. I hope all of you are having a very merry Australia Day, and, well, to those to other viewers in other parts of the world, I hope you're having a decent day all around. So, keep it new metal, and I will see you again for Resident Evil 2. Catch you later.